So, I might be a little late to this conversation because JJK manga releases tend to take precedence on this page, and I, like the rest of the world, was exposed to chapter 167 of Chainsaw Man yesterday because I don't really do Chainsaw Man manga release coverage on this page. I mean, I love Chainsaw Man. It's probably my favorite manga outside of JJK I'm currently keeping up with, but not enough happens in part 2 to necessitate me breaking down what happens every chapter. I mean, I could, but it'd be closer to a TikTok than a YouTube video. That's not the case this week because, while sure, chapter 2 has had a couple of incredibly hype moments, like the aquarium battle or the battle against the falling devil, the majority of part 2 of Chainsaw Man, that is pretty much everything after chapter 90 of the manga, has really just been about building out Denji as a character, showing how he's living this conflicted life as a person who lived as basically a subhuman for the majority of his most formative years, now getting free will, money, and real consciousness, basically, and seeing what Denji, this basically newly formed human, does with not only all of that, but also a small modicum of fame as he is the Chainsaw Man, has really been what the backbone of part 2 has been all about. That and the building up of Asa, our second main character in Chainsaw Man. That and possibly building a romance between these two main characters. See, because while Denji has had stabs at romance in the past with Himino, Makima, Reze, none of those really panned out. Makima was trying to control him to get a handle on Chainsaw Man's heart. Himino is technically a pedophile in all countries not named Japan or other countries that have a 16-year-old consent age, of which I don't know because why would I have that information memorized? It'd be real concerning if I just ripped through a list of every country that had an age of consent under 18. But while we're talking about it, it's Cambodia, Thailand. I'm kidding, I have no idea. And Reze, well, she died. Now, out of all these three options, Reze was legitimately the best possible love option for Denji. That is until, of course, the Asa was introduced. There's only one problem with Asa as it pertains to being a possible love interest for Denji. That is the fact that she's completely socially inept, and thus any momentum being built up towards the idea of Asa and Denji living as lovers and co-protagonists has pretty much blown up on account of the fact that both of them barely know how to talk to humans. On top of that, both of them are living with devils inside of them. And Asa's devil, Yoru, the war devil, while it does have a vested interest in Denji becoming Asa's boyfriend, isn't exactly the most helpful at making that happen. Though, that's not gonna stop them from trying. And trying is exactly what Yoru did in chapter 167. As for now, the second time in anime and manga history, I don't even know how to say it. We got a shake weight incident that ended messy. Listen, I try to go about my videos in a PG fashion, one, for monetization reasons, and two, because I know people who watch me are a myriad of different ages, but today's gonna be hard to talk about in a PG fashion. Let's just say Yoru, manually, you know, she grabbed and when she, you know, and then after the grabbing, there was a surprise, and the surprise, Shinji again, just get in the Ava, Denji. Just get in the Ava. And the fan base of Chainsaw Man is either screaming at the top of their lungs that this is the most peak chapter that's ever been released, or that this is the time to hop off the wagon. And as somebody who tends to fall directly in the middle of both of those takes, as I not only understand what the people who are screaming about it being peak are talking about, but I also understand the people who are saying, yeah, I'm good on that. Today, I want to break down what exactly happens in this chapter and why it's not only good writing, but also probably a bit much. Because today, we're talking chapter 167 of Chainsaw Man Explained. You know, it's like, imagine you squeezed in a Claire, right? But before I ruin my YouTube career, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you don't want to hear me do PG content, go ahead and follow my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, and it's very much not PG. So before we get to talking about the repercussions of what happened in chapter 167 and talking about how what happened in 167 may have been good writing or over the line, we should first go over exactly what did happen in chapter 167 so that you can have the best contextual understanding of what we're talking about possible. So let's break down chapter 167 page by page. It's not that complicated of a chapter, so it shouldn't be that long. And then we'll get to talking about the more repercussions and the writing decision that chapter 167's ending truly was. So chapter 167 starts off exactly where chapter 166 leaves off, with Denji and Yoru, who's now in control of Asa's body, in an alleyway looking for something to make Denji a eunuch, like a manscaped clean shave, but a little too close to the skin, but intentionally. Now Yoru, who is in control of Asa, is searching around for something that she can pick up and turn into a weapon. And thus Yoru picks up a piece of trash and turns it into a knife. Yoru then turns around and tells Denji for some reason that she found a knife on the ground. I don't know why she would lie about her ability. Denji knows exactly how the War Devil's ability works. It's literally how they got out of the aquarium. They made the plan together. So it's not like she's trying to hide the fact that she can turn things into weapons if she believes she owns them. Now you could possibly make the argument that she wouldn't want Denji to know how her ability works because her long-term plan as the War Devil is to turn Denji into a weapon once she's finally Denji's girlfriend. And thus Yoru, who's in a relationship with Denji, would own him in some capacity. But like I've already said, Denji knows how the War Devil's ability works. Anyways, regardless, we'll get more into that point later. Yoru then tells Denji that losing your unit should straighten you out, right? So take it out. Now, a little bit of context for those of you who didn't read chapter 166. In the most SparkNotes summarization of all time, the Control Devil has returned after Makima's death in the form of what is now Denji's little sister, Naota. Naota and Denji are living a relatively normal life together, and Denji is raising her. She's going to school. It's all very cute. However, Naota was kidnapped by a church that worships Chainsawman, and now Denji, the Katana Devil, two people from that Chainsawman church, and Yoru/Asa are all looking for Naota. However, in the midst of looking for Naota, well, I guess technically in the midst of looking for a restaurant to eat at, the Katana Devil told Denji that if he really wanted to straighten his mind out, because Denji's dealing with a lot of conflict now, which is important and we'll get into later, that he should go to a soapland. Now, for those of you who don't know what a soapland is, a soapland is kind of a brothel, but also not really. See, brothels are illegal in Japan, but you know what's not illegal in Japan? Falling in love. So in Japanese soaplands, you go into a building and a woman gives you a bath, and then during that bath, you fall in love with each other and you make sweet love. And because you're paying for the bath and not what comes after, it's technically legal. However, when they get to the soapland that the Katana Man's trying to bring them to that he owns, because mind you, the Katana Man is a part of the Yakuza, or maybe not the Yakuza, but a Japanese gang, they realize the soapland is burnt down, which sends Denji into a massive spiral. Because this makes Denji realize that while his little sister that he very much loves is out somewhere, possibly being tortured, or even worse, he's thinking with his unit. And Denji realizes that for the entirety of the story, his unit's been doing all the thinking. And thus Denji realizes that his sex drive has quite literally gotten in the way of everything he's ever wanted to accomplish. And while Asa is watching this, Yoru takes over and says, well, if you want to get rid of your sex drive, let's just cut it off. Because Yoru simply wants to fight the Chainsaw Devil. Because the Chainsaw Devil, when it battled against the 4 weapons devils in hell, took a bite out of the War Devil, which is why the War Devil isn't as strong as it used to be. And thus the War Devil, who's currently residing in Asa's body, wants to fight against Chainsaw Man. However, Chainsaw Man, like the real Chainsaw Man, like guts as a scarf Chainsaw Man, won't re-emerge unless Denji breaks the rules of the contract on his heart. And the rules of that contract are that Denji needs to live a normal life. And thus if Denji doesn't live a normal life, the Chainsaw Devil will break back out again like it did at the end of part 1. At which point Fami, the Famine Devil, Yoru, the War Devil, and Katana Man will cut down said Chainsaw Devil. They would then transplant a human heart into Denji's chest, and he would get to live a real, ordinary life. And this is what Asa wants. Asa has legitimate feelings for Denji, and she wants to protect him, and thus she needs to defeat the Chainsaw Man inside of Denji to give him a regular life. Yoru takes over Asa after Denji does his screaming fit about being upset about his unit making all his decisions, because Yoru is just in this to fight the Chainsaw Devil. Everyone sticking with me? Okay, good. We're back to chapter 167. Denji, well, he did walk into the alley, technically, to get his unit closely shaved off, yells at Yoru when he realizes she's serious, saying, "You really, literally want to cut off my unit? To which Yoru responds by saying, don't you want to get rid of your sex drive? Take it out. Looking down at what could possibly no longer be his, giving it a tap and saying, you really want me to whip it out? Then starts saying, you legit want to see cut off my unit? And this infuriates Yoru, who says, stop stalling and whip it out already. And Denji says, I don't want to do this anymore. And it's at this point that Denji reaches for Yoru's only hand that's holding the knife, and he knocks the knife out of her hand. Yoru, then apparently a pretty good improviser, takes said now empty hand and it gets a full... The hand's now full. You know when a candy bar falls in a vending machine and you have to kind of reach up and in to try, so you got your hand on the candy bar, right? And then you're like, oh, I gotta get this candy bar out of this vending machine. And it's at this point that Yoru tells Denji that she doesn't care about his stupid feelings. All that she wants to do is fight the chainsaw devil. Yoru then follows this up with a real doozy, with a line that I can only assume is Tatsuki Fujimoto writing himself to be Denji for at least one panel, where Yoru says to Denji, if I crush your family jewels, will that get you in the mood? Now, if I'm being analytical here, I don't know what this means, because objectively, in the context of what's going on here, that's a weird question to ask. See, at this point in time, while Yoru does have a handful of the sausage and beans, Yoru is very actively telling Denji about how they only want to fight the chainsaw devil. Now, it would make sense if Yoru's saying, I'm going to crush the family jewels to get rid of your sex drive, because that would work, but I don't get why the termage here is get you in the mood. Maybe the idea is that once his sex drive is gone, he'll be in the mood to fight and Chainsaw Man will come out? Or this could be the panel where a clear tonal shift is happening. Regardless, the context of this panel is quite vexing. Now, it's important to note here, mostly because it's a big talking point in the discourse revolving around this chapter, that Denji didn't really consent to any of this, but he kind of also does. See, because it's while Yoru has a firm grip on his manlyhood that Yoru remembers something that happened in chapter 119 that she and Denji had been forced to forget. So Yoru remembers, while she's gripping her fingers around the grapes and bananas, that in chapter 119, Asa, well, I guess technically Yoru in that circumstance as well, and Denji kissed. And this begins to make Yoru blush. And it's at this point that Yoru says, kissed, and Denji says, huh? And Yoru says, we've kissed. And thus, once again, Yoru leans in for a kiss. One that makes both Yoru and Denji blush. And then Yoru and Denji proceed to make out while Yoru plays a little pool. And then it's just 4 pages of the two of them making out. That is until Denji starts to make some faces. One would call it an O face, because wouldn't you know it, Yoru has officially slapped the top of Yuji's lotion bottle. Now, Yoru, being a legitimate menace to society, takes this as the time to step out of control. That is to say, in the moment that Denji's filled donut gets stepped on, Asa is back in control. And thus the first thing that Asa has to deal with is looking down at her hand and realizing she didn't rub in her suntan lotion completely. Like Shinji, an end of Evangelion. Just like that, the chapter ends, and we waited 2 weeks for that. So now that we know what happened in this incredible roller coaster of a chapter, let's talk about it, because like we've already established, there is 2 camps of thought as it pertains to how people feel about this chapter. First camp, and probably the much larger camp, is those Chainsaw Man fans who know who Tatsuki Fujimoto is and therefore are screaming about this chapter being peak. Because with a Tatsuki Fujimoto IP, if you're in for a penny, you gotta be in for a pound. And the other camp of people are definitely people who never read Fire Punch and are now somehow just now realizing that Tatsuki Fujimoto's brain is a dark and mysterious place, and thus a lot of people are using chapter 167 as their official stopping point for Chainsaw Man. So what is the objectively right way to feel about this chapter? Well, there isn't really one, but if I had to lean closer to one of the camps, I would probably lean towards the first one. Listen, I'm not going to sit here and say that the reliving of the end of Evangelion on Asa's hand was necessary to the plot, because objectively it wasn't, but at the same time, it's kind of good writing. And it's also much less nefarious than a lot of people are making it out to be. See, here's the thing. A lot of people are moving forward with the assumption that Asa is not into Denji. but she is. And while this absolutely doesn't excuse the situation that Yoru put both Denji and Asa into, it's very clear that Yoru has feelings for Denji, and those feelings are most likely coming from Yoru's relationship with Asa. Asa has already established the fact that she has a massive amount of love in her heart for not only Chainsaw Man, but also Denji, and she had to come to those realizations separately, as Chainsaw Man was a faceless, I guess technically, entity that saved her twice, and thus she slowly had to come to the realization that Denji was telling the truth when he told her that she was Chainsaw Man, the very same entity that she had fallen in love with, even though Denji was so far off her type. Thus, as time has progressed, Asa has gained more and more feelings for Denji. Now, is this the same scenario for Yoru? It's hard to say. See, the only real reason that Asa and Denji went on their first date is because Yoru wanted to make Denji Asa's boyfriend so that Yoru could turn Denji into a weapon. However, after their first date at the aquarium, Yoru tries to turn Denji into a weapon, but it doesn't work. Now, this could be for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that their aquarium date, that is, before they get trapped in the aquarium for a matter of days by a devil, doesn't go that well. Asa believes that by info dumping about sea anemones that Denji will fall in love with her, but Denji finds that incredibly boring. Asa then triggers the trauma inside of Denji when she tells him that he doesn't have to think about anything because that reminds him of Makima. However, after they get trapped in the aquarium by a devil similar to the Infinity Devil, they actually began to bond, and Denji asked her if she's ever eaten a starfish, which showed her that he was listening to her when she was talking about sea anemones, and Denji tells Asa that she's fun to watch, and that her loud, self-aggrandizing manner reminds him of an old friend. Most likely he's talking about power. And when they're finally able to leave the aquarium by buying it and turning it into a weapon, Denji tells Asa that he enjoyed their time together and that he would want to go on a second date. And Asa agrees. And it's at this point that Yoru steps in and tells Asa that she's feeling emotions of love and affection towards Denji, which not only shocks Asa but also embarrasses her. Now Yoru, realizing that this was as good an opportunity as any to try and turn Denji into a weapon, tries to turn Denji into a weapon, but it doesn't work, which upsets Asa because she knows she has feelings for Denji. So Denji not turning into a weapon must mean that Denji doesn't have feelings for her, and thus they go on with their agreement of a second date, and their second date happens at Denji's house. Now, the second date goes about as bad as the first one because both of them are still terrible at the whole socialization thing, but when Denji brings up the topic of the two of them possibly kissing because they're in his apartment and they're on their second date, Asa gets flustered and says that she would never kiss him, and that she hates him, and that if they end up dating, she'll probably end up killing him. Now, there's a couple of different ways to interpret this chapter. So you could interpret it in a very literal sense, and you could take what Asa is saying at face value. I mean, after all, Asa is only on this second date because she wants to be freed of the War Devil who wants to kill the Chainsaw Devil. But you could also do a little bit of reading behind the actual words and realize that Asa telling Denji that if they dated, he'll probably end up dead is her warning him about the possible implications of him being turned into a weapon if he ever has mutual feelings for her. And this is kind of corroborated by how chapter 119 goes. See, because immediately after relaying the idea that if the two of them end up together, that Denji will end up dead, Yoru takes over Asa's body and kisses Denji, as if trying to stop her from telling Denji the truth of the situation. However, at this moment in time, Naota gets home from walking all the dogs and calls Yoru/Asa a thief, presumably because Asa is trying to steal Denji. And in response to seeing Yoru kiss Denji, Naota fires off chains into both of their brains, making the both of them forget about this second date and actually putting it in their heads that Denji had stood up Asa on this second date, which genuinely upsets Asa, as while she rambles on for a little bit about how this doesn't affect her, eventually she does admit that it hurt, and she's feeling down because of it. Now, this is followed up by the introduction of the Falling Devil, because the Falling Devil causes those who are in despair to commit unlive. But just before Asa is able to take her own life because she's under the spell of the Falling Devil, Chainsaw Man saves her, again for the second time. And once again, she begins to see a different side to Denji, a side she likes. That is until he starts to go on a rant about how much he wants to have sex, which grosses Asa out because she finds sex disgusting. Now, it's at this point that she really hurts Denji's feelings by saying that no woman would ever want to bang somebody with a chainsaw for a head, which causes Denji to fall into a despair so deep that he drags the both of them down into hell. However, with a little bit of collaborative effort between the two of them, they are eventually able to claw out of hell. However, getting out of hell has heavily injured Denji/Chainsaw Man, and it's at this point that Asa has the ability to finish off Chainsaw Man, which would have freed her from Yoru. And thus, instead of being freed from the War Devil, Asa then decides to cut her hand and give the blood to Denji, rejuvenating him. She then pulls his ripcord and tells Chainsaw Chainsaw Man to save them. And this moment is meant to display to us that Yoru, while she may not agree with the entirety of Denji's character, is beginning to see why people are inspired by him. And more than that, she's appreciative of everything that Denji/Chainsaw Man has done for her. And as time progresses, Asa begins to fall more and more in love with Denji, as she would often have flashbacks of the times that he rescued her and would think back on the words of encouragement that he gave her. She even goes so far as to write a literal poem expressing her love for Chainsaw Man, which is why come chapter 165, 66, and 67, Asa seems so dedicated to giving Denji a regular life. She feels as though she owes it to him.
But Nick, why are we talking about all of this?
Well, it's to establish precedent that Asa has a fair amount of feelings for Denji. And since Asa and Yoru have a much more collaborative existence than Denji and Pochita, as the two of them swap who's in control fairly often, it's believed, though not obviously confirmed, that Asa's feelings for Denji are starting to bleed into Yoru. And therefore the reason that Yoru got so bashful when she remembered that her and Denji had kissed was because Yoru is beginning to have feelings for Denji. Tie this into the fact that Yoru is trying to make Denji into Asa's boyfriend so that Yoru can turn Denji into a weapon, and the combination of these two motivations running parallel with each other is probably what inspired Yoru to make a move on Denji. But is this okay from like a writing perspective? Is it what Asa would have wanted? Is there a consent issue in all of this? And like, genuinely, it's kind of hard to say. Asa does have feelings for Denji, but that doesn't mean that Asa would have wanted to give him a handy in a rainy alley. Denji does have feelings for Asa, and he very clearly enjoyed what happened in that alley, but is that how he wanted it to happen? Maybe. Probably. I don't know. Denji is kind of sick and depraved. The only real saving grace in legitimately any of this is that we can assume Asa is the same age as Denji, and Denji is 18. And thus, if you want to make the argument that this is something that Asa would have wanted to do and is probably going to be fine with it, sure, go ahead and make it. Because in a sense, it was two consenting-ish adults engaging in a sexual act. Now, I'm not going to make that argument because making that argument makes me feel icky, but if you wanted to say that there was a track record of mutual interest between the two of them and that Yoru is the manifestation of Asa's id in a sense, pushing the very usually nonchalant, socially inept, and shy girl to do the things that she actually wants to do, then maybe you can make that argument. But once again, I will not be making that argument. But Nick, you said in the beginning of this video that this was actually a well-written moment, and if you're not willing to make an argument in that sense for it being well-written, what were you talking about? Well, unfortunately, this moment is much more indefensible for Asa than it is for Denji. Let me explain. See if you genuinely just ignore what actually happened in this chapter and how it was drawn and all that. The context of this moment, knowing what happened, is actually very important for Denji. See, the entirety of part 2 of Chainsaw Man is built around the conflict going on in Denji's heart. See, Denji wants to be the super famous chainsaw man who uses his fame and power to sleep with as many women as possible. However, the entire world is telling him he can't do exactly that, as Hirofumi Yoshida and the rest of the devil-killing community is telling Denji to not reveal his secret identity, as if he does reveal his identity, it will not only lead to the loss of his social life, but also his actual breathing life. And thus Denji is stuck between a rock and a hard place. The rock being people telling him not to reveal his identity, and the hard place being the you can finish that joke for me. And thus Denji, for the majority of part 2, has been trying to reveal his identity in a low-key kind of way. Whether that be literally telling people he's the Chainsaw Man or leaving his school ID at places where the Chainsaw Man fought people. But now, on top of all of this, in part 2, a church is founded to worship Chainsaw Man. And at the head of that church, somebody comes out and reveals themselves to be Chainsaw Man, meaning that Denji has to watch somebody else get the accolades for all the things that he's done, all the while having the entirety of the special divisions breathing down his neck, telling him not to reveal his own identity and prove the Chainsaw Man church wrong. Tie this into what Denji has currently been going through, with the loss of Naoto, all of their pets, and their apartment, all because Denji refuses to give up the mantle of the Chainsaw Man, and Denji is stuck in this quandary of either wanting to be this rock star Chainsaw Man or a person who gets to live an ordinary life with his little sister and their pets. And that's been the core of part 2 of Chainsaw Man. That's actually why it's been so interesting to me, because Denji's being written like an incredibly interesting character, somebody stuck between two polar opposite wants. And as Denji's never really had anything good in his life, he doesn't know what's truly important to him yet. So he's following his id, his basal nature, the core, deepest, darkest part of any man that tells us we just need to spread our seed, because he doesn't have a fully developed ego or super ego to help coach him into being a full human, a boy who can simply go to high school and live with his little sister and walk his dogs. Because the first thing that Denji was ever introduced to as a legitimate conscious human was Makima and being Chainsaw Man and being an actual rock star. And thus, one of the most insightful things that we actually learned from Denji in the last couple of chapters was in chapter 167 when Denji was having a conversation with Asa, where he asked her if she knew what toilet paper tastes like. Because back when he was broke, he used to sneak into public restrooms and eat the toilet paper. Denji then says, but once I stopped going hungry, I could no longer eat toilet paper. Now, this is a thinly veiled metaphor for Denji basically saying, I've gotten used to this high octane type of life, and I don't want to give it up. Basically saying that returning to an ordinary life as a high school student just wouldn't feel the same. And this conflict in Denji's heart only gets worse when he follows the Katana Devil to a soap house, where he realizes as he's staring upon this burnt down establishment to cleanliness that he could be looking for his lost little sister, but instead he's trying to go to a brothel. And thus in this moment he comes to the actual realization of why he's always at conflict, and it's the family jewels. Genuinely, he reveals to us in chapter 166 the only reason he wants to be Chainsaw Man is so that he can get mega popular and sleep with a bunch of women. And thus, the only reason he can't give up being Chainsaw Man and live a regular life with his little sister, who he loves, is because he wants to sleep with women. And thus the reason that I find chapter 167 actually compelling is because Denji, for literally the first time in 167 chapters of chasing after women, finally kind of gets what he wants in the worst way possible. See, Denji finally gets the sexual satisfaction that he's been looking for the entirety of Chainsaw Man's run, but he gets it at the moment that he realizes that he shouldn't be doing exactly what he's currently doing with somebody he has actual feelings for, who was maybe possibly coerced into this action. And thus this moment that should be this triumph for Denji is marred with disappointment, regret, and awkwardness. And that moment is meant to speak to the conflict that's going on in Denji's soul, which is perfect because the execution of this moment also has me heavily conflicted. See, I believe this moment is supposed to act as a legitimate turning point in Denji's story, point in his life that either makes up his mind that he should be Chainsaw Man or that he should just be an ordinary teenager. And thus, in that sense, I believe that this moment is not only incredibly poetic, but also fairly well written, especially when you consider the context of the entirety of Chainsaw Man. See, here's the thing. If Chainsaw Man wasn't a story about a 16-year-old, now 18-year-old, trying to get laid by being a super powerful Chainsaw Man for 167 chapters, then this chapter would not only be weird, but also inherently wrong. But when we've been talking about this kind of thing coming to fruition for the entirety of this manga's run up until this point, this kind of thing acting as a turning point or a pivotal moment in the story kind of makes sense. Because what I believe is being lost in a lot of the discourse revolving around this chapter is that we're talking about Chainsaw Man, a story that's never paraded itself to be anything less than a debaucherous mess. Thus, if I had to choose a side, I would say that this chapter leans closer to peak than a total mess that makes you abandon the story, but at the same time, I'm still absolutely allowed to feel icky about it because I don't necessarily love the situation that this has thrust Asa into. And you're allowed to have those two thoughts simultaneously. You can say, wow, I sure wish there was more consent in this whole shebang, while also acknowledging the fact that the inherent lack of it also lends to technically better writing around this moment. Because if Denji and Asa had just skipped off into the alley and made sweet, sweet consensual love that they both super enjoyed, that wouldn't have been a conflicting moment for Denji. And thus in that moment, he would have got exactly what he wanted, but that wouldn't be in line with what's going on in his heart in part two. And thus, while the symbolism of a moment can be well done, it can also look at that moment and go, ugh. And writing that makes you feel those two things simultaneously is good writing. It's compelling, and that's why we're talking about it. But I want to hear what you guys think about this chapter. So after reading chapter 167, what are your thoughts? Do you believe this moment was worth it? Do you believe this moment could have been cut? Or is there a different way that you would have gone about it? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell